so hopefully everyone can hear me. We're going to be talking about React Native thinking offline. My name is Houssein. Sorry, he has the mic right now. I work at Wrangle.io. We're right down the street. I'm a JavaScript developer. Anytime you want to say hi, you know I am. And I'm Hassan. I work at Shopify as a front-end developer. You guys want to say hi to me as well? Okay, so first and foremost, a quick blurb on React Native. React Native is a library that allows you to build mobile applications with JavaScript. It adopts the concepts of React that we know, such as reusable components and unidirectional data flow, to allow you to build native scalable UI. The really good thing about React Native is it allows you to dive into the native code, iOS and Android, whenever you want to do so. I think we're all used to seeing a loading indicator like this whenever we launch our mobile applications. You become accustomed to understand that this basically means, hey, data is being fetched, just sit tight and be patient. But as developers, we want to minimize this. We want to minimize the amount of time it takes for the first meaningful data to be rendered to the user. This is often understood as first meaningful paint. We also want to minimize the amount of time it takes for a user to actually interact with the app. This is also known as time to interact. What about offline support? When you ever hear someone say, hey, I want this application to work offline, what does that mean? If you think about it, if there are asynchronous API requests that need to be made, technically you need to have a network connection, right? And this is where the concept of persistence comes in. As consumers, we all spend a significant amount of time on our applications, and our mobile apps in particular. And we expect to see some form of data, whether we're online or offline. So how do we go actually persisting data? React Native, we have async storage for this. Async storage is React Native's recommended way to persist simple data between app restarts. Async storage is asynchronous, persistent key value storage system that's global to the entire mobile application. On iOS, it's backed by native code to actually store small values in a serialized dictionary and larger values in separate files. And on Android, it takes advantage of RocksDB or SQLite, depending on what's available. So let's see a very simple example of how we can actually use async storage to persist a small piece of state. If you guys never use React or JavaScript or anything along the lines, I'll try to break this down as much as possible. So this is a component known as title component. Whenever a component is rendered for the very first time, the component didMount method runs first. And two things happen here. Async storage actually aims to fetch information with the key of title, and it actually sets that information within the component's internal states. The render method basically displays how the component is going to look like. Initially, we destructure that state to get that variable within title, and we basically present that information within the text element. The text input element has an onChange text prop. The onChange text prop basically listens to every keystroke that the user is making and calls another method that we specified called persist title. The persist title method also does two things. The first case, it actually persists information with async storage to the key of title based on the information that's being absorbed. And it also sets the state internally. So let's basically break down this entire component. When the user actually runs the application for the very first time, there's no information stored in async storage. Nothing's going to be fetched, and nothing's going to be stored within states. So the only thing the user is going to see is actually just the text input field. As the user starts typing information in, this is where the persist title method runs, and the set state method actually runs internally to re-render the application to see what the user is actually typing. Now when the user actually closes the app and launches it again for another time, this is where the component didMount method does what it tends to do. It fetches the information that the user actually typed previously. The user will be able to see, hey, this is what I actually did last. This is a very simple use case and a very simple example. I'll let Houssein take it from here to explain how this works for large applications. So the approach that Hassan just showed can work in a lot of your applications. You can build your React or React Native app using component local state and have this.setState everywhere in your app. But it can get tricky if you're thinking of using async storage. You're going to have getters and setters in each part of your application all throughout your components. There's a lot of libraries out there that try to allow us to manage state better. And one such library is called Redux. The idea behind Redux is that it's a predictable state container that you can use in your application in order to manage and organize your entire state. You have to submit actions that go through dispatches that actually goes to your reducer in order to update your state. The way it works is that your reducer will actually use the current state as well as the action coming in order to create a brand new version of your state. You're doing this without mutating your current state. With Redux, your entire state is nothing more than just a single JavaScript object. And the reason why this makes sense is that when you're thinking of persistence, you can persist this entire object instead of just certain parts. One such library that actually makes persisting Redux state easier is called Redux Persist. So here's some code that actually shows you how simple it is to create a store with Redux and actually use Redux Persist. At the very top, we're importing what we need from both Redux and Persist. We're importing the compose utility method, the apply middleware enhancer, and create store method. And then from Redux Persist, we're only importing two things: persist store and auto rehydrate. Now, when we actually try to create our store, we just run the create store method. The very first argument, we actually bring in our reducer. And the second argument is just all the enhancers we need for our Redux store. Now, enhancers in Redux methodology is just higher order versions of your store. In other words, you're letting your store do newer things that it couldn't do previously. The very first enhancer we're adding is called apply middleware, and it's something you might need to do with Redux in general. If you want to add logging middleware, or if you want to actually apply asynchronous actions, you most likely need a middleware of some sort. But the second one we're adding is auto rehydrate, and that's coming from Redux Persist. The way auto rehydrate works is that now every single time I reload my application, that actually submits an action that actually updates my store from storage, which is most likely async storage. So now we know that when I boot up my application, once this action is fired, I can have data actually shown to the user. And then in the root of your app, or anywhere in your app, you can just run the persist store method, actually give your store as the first argument, and then define your storage. You can use Redux Persist for more than just native applications. You can even use it for reactive web. Storage will default to local storage. But if you're building a mobile application, you'll most likely want to use async storage. So here's an example of an application that actually uses Redux Persist and how it works when I reload an application for a second or third time. You can see, even though that API call to get that data is actually being fired, I still see all the data immediately. This cuts down first paint time significantly. Now, as useful as using something like Redux Persist can be, maybe you don't want to actually persist everything in your Redux store. Maybe you have, I don't know, authentication details or something you don't want persisted. The nice thing about the API is that it actually gives you some more fine-grained control. You can add a whitelist attribute and define specifically which reducers you only want to persist. And in the opposite way, you can also add a blacklist attribute to actually tell Redux persist everything except these two specific objects. Another very useful library that I also suggest taking a look at is called Redux Optimist. And the way Redux Optimist works is it allows you to actually apply your Redux actions in an optimistic manner. A good use case or a good example of this is when a user tries to submit an API call. Let's say they're using a social media application and they want to post a comment. Now, if they're doing this and if their phone's in airplane mode, you can have Redux Optimist actually render your brand new Redux state so your user feels like an API call is fired. And then later on, when the device actually gets a working network connection, this can actually now submit an actual action right without the user knowing that's actually being submitted. And the very last thing we want to also show is Redux Offline. The way this works is that it's a separate library built by Jani, who's an engineer in Formidable Labs, and it uses Redux Persist under the hood, as well as patterns from Redux Optimist. It has a completely different API, and some might think a cleaner API, but allows you to build parts of your Redux state, as well as think of your actions in an optimistic manner. So how is it just taking a look at it if you're interested in offline support? I hope you enjoyed this talk as much as we enjoyed giving it. My name is Houssein. I'm Hassan. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to receive them. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yeah.
When Redux offline is the only thing you need to like read offline and start. It provides the abstraction.
Yeah, so it's just somebody tried to reimagine how you can think of offline in terms of all your Redux actions. And I've looked through the API and it looks quite clean and easy to digest. I haven't actually used it in application. I've used Redux persist and it's worked fine for me. So it really depends on your use case and which library you prefer. The idea again is if you use Redux offline, you will have everything that you should do. Yeah.
Is there a library Redux also that provides end-to-end encryption so your data is not stored
That's a very good question. So when I actually tried using Redux persist, one part of my reducer actually had access tokens for use. And it can be a bit of a touchy subject because you might want to actually persist that so when the user reloads the application, they don't have to be logged in, but if somebody actually needs to hold your device, maybe you don't want them to actually have access. Luckily, Redux persist, somebody's built a third party called Persist Encrypt that you actually include as sort of a middleware to Redux persist. And what it does is that you just give it a hash, and it actually hashes whatever you specify, let's say your access token, MD5, so it encrypts it so that, which is actually something you should think about when you're trying to persist important data. That's a good question.
I'm sure you can also probably use standard encryption libraries with Redux persist. I've never done it, but I'm sure you can probably apply that layer. If you want to do manual, I'm sure you can. But at least it's good to have a library.
Oh, yeah. So if I haven't actually built any native iOS or Android apps, but the nice thing about Redux persist is that a lot of people who build React or React Native, they already are using Redux. And that's why using a separate library and saying, hey, persist everything is a really nice and simple way to do. But I'm 100% sure that there's definitely a library for iOS, I would imagine, because they do use ASIC storage on their own. So I'm 95% sure there is a method to it. I don't know any names, but I'm quite certain. Yeah.
I was wondering about the React Native. You said it targets iOS and Android. Is it like a web version as well, or a desktop, or are they good, or are they
So there is actually. And the beautiful thing behind React is what people often say is 90% of your React code is reusable for React Desktop, for React Native, and then there's only a few other things that you have to apply on top of it. The one thing we've noticed in React Native in particular is styling. When people build web applications, they usually style from a monitor and from a desktop. The big kicker in this case is actually styling for mobile app. But if you have, let's say, a particular Redux store that's already been used, you can already transfer that for your React mobile as well as desktop applications. I do know React is getting to VR as well. That's like another layer that I've never looked into, but I think it's huge potential there.
So you would specific code bases, or you would just wrap a lot of if statements in your one code base?
You could wrap a lot of their statements. I'm 100% on the fence of separating them. The beautiful thing is you can just reuse your code. So you can reuse majority of it and then basically everything.
Yeah, he's right. The good thing, and I've tried like building a React Native version of React JavaScript before. The nice thing was all my actions and my Redux containers and reducers all carried forward, and it was just the view components I need to change, which is beautiful. But there are actually tools out there that are allowing people to build a single API, a single code base, that you can have a web and mobile app. Twitter built one, and it's called React Native Web. I don't know if I'm sure.
We're not on the Wi-Fi.
We have our
Offline mode.
I know. That's when you think about people doing stuff.
I think we're in actually. It's React Native
Right, yeah. I'll wait. Next, second. So a couple of Twitter engineers built this, and what this does is it allows you to code in that same React Native API, but it allows you to actually build a web app as well as a native mobile app. And the nice thing about this, you don't have to worry about two these code bases. I've used another one by Microsoft called React XP, which you can also show if you like, and the idea is also the same. I would love to. I think it's more than just web. I'm pretty sure this also goes to Xbox development. I'm pretty sure, and it's pretty cool. The only slight issue I had with this when I tried using it was when building a mobile app, navigation is a big deal, right? When you're having screens push on top of screens, and you have a tab navigator at the bottom. And what I've noticed was the web app that this sort of renders will have that same sort of feel. And it might feel kind of unusual to have a tab navigator in a drawer for a web app, right? So I think that's something that we're still trying to discuss and think about when it comes. But for me, other than that, it works quite smoothly.
Yeah, just on that point, I was going to add too. I would, in the meantime, definitely focus on, this is me personally, separating what you need to do from mobile or desktop, purely for small quirks like that. Random bugs or issues that you know maybe cater to mobile, you don't want it to affect your web-based code. But over time, this thing will continue.
Different opinions. Yeah, I know this one's being used for Skype, and I know React Native Web is being used for Twitter Lite. So they are being used in production. Depends on use case. Good. I know we can say that.
React often is something that is one of the issues I understand it, because most people are outgoing calls to Houston if they don't have a
What allows you to do is it sort of allows you to queue your actions, your UX actions, and then on certain conditions, you can, it doesn't have to be a network connection. And it allows you to sort of queue and say, hey, if, let's say, my condition was a network connection, if that doesn't exist, just show the state like it actually happened, and then when that actually happens, actually submit that call. And for me, that was the biggest use case that I've seen, but I'm sure you can apply to more than just network connections.
So then you have to figure out how to
The idea is, yeah, I think you should, exactly. Because if you're completely closed your application, if it's using a mobile app, then yeah, you guys can help that actually fine.
I would assume in that case, you close your app, then open it again, because it's optimal to make the actions fire.
Especially if you all persistent at information right now.
Curious how React Optimus plays with service workers. Is it taking advantage of the same technology?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So I've only looked into using React Optimist for actually native mobile applications like iOS and Android, so service workers work capability, but you can use this for web apps that use service workers. And that's a very good point because service workers, for many people who don't know, is a script that runs in the background of your browser when you try to view a page and allows you to cache all your assets or resources. Now, if you're using Redux to persist data to local storage, that's going to live in a separate data storage than your service worker cache. So it's something to think about. You can try persistent local storage and then having service workers. It might not be the most ideal thing to have both caches. So it really depends on the trying to actually go.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.